Well, you're absolutely right, Sam. A direct result of client-focused reforms is a significantly increased work burden and paperwork burden, whatever you might want to call it, on advisors. So it has made advisors' day-to-day operations less efficient. That is a given. And when I was working with advisors in the past and now, they need to do in order to get through that and in order to overcome that sort of deficit in efficiency that's been generated by the regulation is to bring in new systems and new tools that will not only make up for that efficiency, what I'll call efficiency deficit, but make them even more efficient than they were before.
Welcome to the Future Ready Advisor Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, wealth management consultant and behavioral scientist. Join me and my guests, from industry experts to top advisors, as we explore the pain points that financial advisors face, how they can solve them, free up their time, and make their practice future ready. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm here with Bill Donegan, a regulatory expert, who is here to talk about the recent merger we had in the regulatory scene in Canada and implications for advisors and firms. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dan. I'll just give you a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer by training. In my background, I've worked for two different regulators as counsel, one being the Law Society of Ontario and the other one being the Mutual Fund Dealers Association, way back when it was just getting started. But also probably more relevant to our discussion today, I've been the Chief Compliance Officer for three different mutual fund dealers and two different investment dealers over the past few years. And I've pretty much seen everything that could happen in the dealer distribution space. Last year, I joined a small law firm, AUM Law, which is owned by the larger law firm, Borden Ladner Gervais. And what I do there is provide support and advice to mutual fund dealers, investment dealers, portfolio managers, exempt market dealers, and small investment fund managers. So, and our advice really connects to all things related to compliance. I've also taken a special interest because I've been involved with both the MFDA and the old IIROC for quite a long time. As a member of the MFDA, former member of the MFDA Policy Advisory Committee and the IIROC Ontario District Council, as well as the IIROC National Hearing Committee. So I'm taken an interest in this, and I'm pretty well versed on what the challenges are and what the opportunities are coming out of this great development. And I'm just delighted to be here to see you, Sam. You're an old friend, and looking forward to our discussion today.
You and me both, Bill. I think I'm excited. I think, as you just put it, I think you've got a wealth of background, experience, and knowledge in, I think, a very, very rapidly changing environment. So I'm beyond excited to get into our conversation. So with that, let's dive in. As I said at the outset, we've had this IIROC MFDA merger. Given your background and your knowledge and experience of all sides, I'd love for you to briefly comment on the rationale for that and tell us where you see that the opportunity lies for advisors going forward.
Yeah, I think the rationale is it's been a discussion in the industry for a long time about the duplication between those two regulatory organizations. While the industries that they regulate are a little bit different in that the mutual fund industry is much more focused on a single product, where the investment dealer space is on a broad shelf of many different types of product. The activities they perform are quite similar. Basically, the enforcement process, the compliance examination process, the regulatory policy development process. There is a fair amount of commonality between them. And also within the industry, there are quite a few organizations, not just the banks, but other independent dealer organizations and organizations affiliated with insurance companies and other entities that have both used to have MFDA and IIROC dealers And so there was quite a bit of duplication between those two entities. And it just made a lot of sense to bring those entities together and to try and achieve some scale and some economy of scale and to eliminate a lot of the duplication. And also, it's probably going to be beneficial from a regulatory point of view to have one view over both of those areas. So there's consistency in regulation. That's beneficial both to advisors and to the public. It's beneficial to advisors because advisors do migrate between the platforms, particularly from mutual fund license to investment dealer license. And the more consistency there is, the easier it is for the advisor and for the dealer firm to achieve that. And then for investors, investors are, it's hard for them to keep track of all of these different regulatory organizations. And the fewer regulatory organizations there are, the better it is and the simpler it is for consumers to understand the regulatory structure, which exists to regulate their investments, and in many cases, their retirement savings and their life savings. So, I think it just made sense. And I was astonished at how fast this occurred. There's been discussion about it for years, but it really was just over 3 years ago that the CSA announced their intention to seriously study this. And it came together in approximately 3 years, with the merger actually occurring January 1st this year. And in regulatory timeframes, that's really fast. And I think part of the reason why it went so fast was because at the industry level, there really wasn't much opposition to this. It just made so much sense.
I was just going to say, I think to your point, I think it made sense for the industry to avoid duplication, to facilitate migration of practices from the MFDA regime to an investment dealer regime. And is it fair to say, Bill, that from a consumer perspective, besides the clarity that it provides them, you avoid the possibility of regulatory cracks happening or regulatory arbitrage occurring where the consumer doesn't know whether they're actually covered under this legislation or that legislation, and it might be that they're covered under neither. Is that a fair comment to make?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And in the past there were two different investor protection funds, one for the mutual fund dealer side of the business, and then there was the Canadian Investor Protection Fund for the investment dealer side of the business. And together with the merger of the two SROs, there was a merger of the investor protection funds. So now there's actually one fund over that very large piece of the industry. So that's a good thing. Again, simplification for consumers. If there is an issue, there's one stop for them to go to if they have a mutual fund dealer account or an investment dealer account.
So switching gears, now asking you to put your compliance hat back on. I'm certainly interested. We've seen a lot of write-ups in recent years, but what is the biggest compliance pitfall you've seen over the years?
Oh, pitfall. That's actually an easy question. In regulatory examinations of dealers and advisors, in the internal audit team examinations that dealers do on their branches and their advisors, the number one finding is related to poor note taking and poor documentation to support conclusions around know your client, know your product, suitability made by advisors. That remains the number one finding and the number one issue. Now, where it becomes a pitfall is, well, if it's a finding, that's not good for the advisor because the advisor then has to go in and correct the issue. But where it can really be a pitfall for an advisor and for a firm is when there's an issue with a client, there's a client complaint, and the advisor simply cannot produce notes to support the KYC discussions they might have had with the client, the product discussions, and the suitability analysis they might have done, or the know your product research that the advisor might have done. And with the advent of client-focused reforms, the importance of note taking is enhanced because now KYC has been enhanced. There's more information, more detailed information that needs to be known about clients. Know your product has been enhanced significantly. Advisors need to have an in-depth knowledge of the products they sell. And it's not just saying, well, I know this stock, I know this mutual fund, I know this manager, I've used them for years. You have to have documented research, which from an objective point of view supports the selection of that product over others that might be available for the client. And that needs to be documented, it needs to be saved, and it needs to be current. And the other burden that's come out of client focused reforms, and it's a good thing, it needs to be monitored. So advisors need to monitor the mutual funds they sell, the stocks they've sold, or that they would recommend for material changes, because if there is a material change in the product, that could impact the suitability of recommendations that had been made to clients in the past. So, and back to KYC, with a more sophisticated, especially higher net worth client, there should be a financial worksheet. There should be a detailed discussion about the client's risk profile, which means diving deep into the risk tolerance of the client and the risk capacity of the client. And so the pitfall, it really is poor documentation. And where it can really hurt is if there's a problem with the client and if there's a complaint. I'll leave you with something that an old regulator told me a long time ago, and this is basically the attitude when an advisor gets in trouble. If it isn't documented, if it isn't noted, basically, if it isn't there on paper or digital form nowadays, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And the onus is very heavy on the advisor to not just say, well, yeah, I said this and that to the client, or I know this product really well. They have to prove it. They have to prove it with documentation.
No, I think that's a great point, Bill. And genesis of all of these reforms, as you say, is really to focus and protect the end consumer. And I think we can all agree with that. I suspect that some advisors or many advisors would agree with the purpose of these reforms. But the reality of it is that it does create more work in an already busy schedule for advisors. I'm sure you can empathize with that. I mean, what would you say to advisors? What have you said to advisors in terms of how they should be thinking about this extra work burden on them?
Well, you're absolutely right, Sam. A direct result of client-focused reforms is a significantly increased work burden and paperwork burden, whatever you might want to call it, on advisors. So it has made advisors' day-to-day operations less efficient. That is a given. And when I was working with advisors in the past and now, what they need to do in order to get through that and in order to overcome that sort of deficit in efficiency that's been generated by the regulation is to bring in new systems and new tools that will not only make up for that efficiency, what I'll call efficiency deficit, but make them even more efficient than they were before. So if you're talking about KYC with clients, start using a tool for collecting all the financial information. If it's a worksheet, a spreadsheet, whatever it is, standardize your tool for financial information collecting. Standardize your tool for the collection of personal information. Maybe use a questionnaire, some kind of standard form tool, drop downs and check boxes, etc. For doing KYP, know your product, there are a number of tools out there that allow advisors to quite efficiently and effectively research any kind of security product, from fixed income to equities to mutual funds and other types of product. Those tools are really great because they have tremendous amounts of data in them. There's a number of vendors that sell them. I'm not going to promote any particular vendor here. And they also enable the advisor, when they've completed their analysis, to download and save the analysis. So that's how an advisor can document and retain. There are other tools out there that do daily monitoring of the full range of securities, mutual funds to stocks and bonds, etc. to look for material changes, and they will report them to the advisor on a daily basis. Some of them are smart enough, and the firm would need to look into these products in order to make them practically available, to just limit their analysis to the product which is in the advisor's book of business. So the advisor can get a daily report, and in my experience, those reports can be tweaked to sort of filter out a lot of noise, because when you initially start to use that type of reporting, it can over-report and give a lot of false hits. But those technology tools that can help with the core business of doing KYC, KYP, and that feeds into suitability are what I think advisors need to embrace. If they're not embracing technology, it's going to be very difficult for an advisor that wants to service the book of business effectively and grow that book of business effectively. So technology and tools are I think the key now to moving forward in a way that's compliant, also meets the documentation requirements, and allows advisors to grow and build their business efficiently.
That's a very good point, Bill. I think that technology, tools, and processes are going to be critical to be able to deal with this new landscape. And let's face it, it's not going away. It is the regulatory regime requiring KYC, KYP, I think is only going to get stronger. And I think for advisors to adapt their practice using technology, using tools, using processes is going to make them more efficient and compliant. And I think I would put it this way, and I think you could probably agree to that, given your enforcement hat, is a little bit of time invested up front in documenting saves lots of time and lots of headaches and lots of potential cost down the road if there ever becomes a problem or a complaint that the client initiates that is going to protect the advisor first and the firm second.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And the more efficient advisors are in documenting what's material and important, the better off that advisor will be if something happens down the road, or if a regulator comes in and just on a routine business conduct examination finds that the advisor just basically hasn't been properly documenting their meetings with clients, their client instructions, KYC, hasn't been properly documenting their product recommendations and their suitability analysis. That will cause a lot of trouble for an advisor, even on a routine review. I mean, can you imagine if there's a compliance examination by a regulator and they find that an advisor's big chunk of the book of business basically is undocumented? They will make the advisor go back and meet with all of those clients and document it properly. And that's a huge amount of work. And also, I would suggest a big inconvenience for the clients. They won't be happy, a lot of them.
Yes, I can imagine. I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. So we've seen the MFDA IIROC merger. I've at least seen indications that this might be the first of a number of other regulatory changes that might be on the horizon. What do you think? As I say, looking into your crystal ball, what do you see over the next 5 years in the regulatory world?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't even need a crystal ball to know about two really big developments that are in the works right now. One is going to T+1 settlement. And when that occurs, it's going to be a good thing overall, because the earlier transactions settle, the sooner people get their money. So that's a really good thing. However, with mutual funds, it's going to be optional as to whether they move from T+2 to T+1, because a lot of the mutual funds will have investments in other foreign jurisdictions, principally Europe, which will not settle T+1. They'll still continue to settle T+2. So the Canadian Securities Administrators have kind of given a buy to fund manufacturers to choose an option whether they go T+1, T+2 for their funds. And so far, from what I'm hearing, the fund manufacturers are considering what they're going to do, and I think there's a fair consensus of opinion around the fact that no manufacturer would want to say with a purely Canadian equity, like U.S. Canadian equity holdings fund, they'd want to go T+1 and have their other funds in their family that would have more global holdings going to T+2. They want to have the same settlement cycle for their whole family. So I think you're going to see mutual funds staying at T+2, which of course for an advisor and an investment dealer that has both mutual funds and equities, fixed income, and so on in the client account, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, especially if they're, say, selling mutual funds to buy equities, and the money flow will be timed differently. So, but I digress quite a bit on that. T+1 is a big one that's coming. The other one is total cost reporting, and fund managers are now working on that. The impact for advisors is going to be that related to the report that clients are going to get for the year ending, starting the year ending December 31st, 2026. So it should come out in January 2027, where in addition to the information that they get now on the annual report concerning fees and costs and compensation, which shows the trailing commissions and the dealer charges and so on, there's also going to be a report in dollars of the total amount that the client spent or was charged relative to the holdings in the account. So what that means is that fund managers are going to aggregate the amounts that they charge for the management they do of mutual funds, and that amount will be transmitted down to dealer organizations, who then will aggregate across all the funds that are held in an account a total dollar number that the client would have been charged annually for all of those holdings. So that's going to be a new thing. It's actually quite a complicated build, and I've glossed over a lot of the operational details, which a lot of good minds are working on right now as to how that can be calculated, transmitted, and presented on a statement. But that's going to be a big thing for advisors. Advisors are going to have to prepare for this, and they're going to have to think about how they're going to have a discussion with the client who comes in with this report and asks about, what are these fees? It's a lot of money. What does it mean? And so on. And then looking farther ahead, and this is coming directly out of the merger or amalgamation of the MFDA and IIROC into CIRO, the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization. The CSA in the paper that they position paper that they put forward on SRO consolidation have said that this is just the first phase. And in their view, the second phase of this will be to bring the other distribution registration categories or firm types in Canada under the umbrella of this single SRO, the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization. So what they're talking about with phase two would involve having firms registered in the category of portfolio manager, registered in the category of exempt market dealer, registered in the category of scholarship plan dealer, brought under the regulatory umbrella of CIRO. And so they would move from being regulated, as they are now, by the provincial commissions to being regulated by CIRO. And this is because of the size and breadth of that industry. There's a lot of portfolio managers and a lot of exempt market dealers in Canada. That's a pretty big undertaking. And I think this will be, what can I say, a bumpier journey, a rougher ride than to get this done than it was to merge together MFDA and IIROC, because there was a lot of industry goodwill supporting that merger. I don't think that goodwill exists, at least to the same degree, around bringing those other entities under the umbrella of CIRO. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And so that's sort of the That's the thing that's been put out there, but there's really no clear time frame for that. But that is probably the biggest change that we see at least possibly happening and being on the horizon. But we're a long way. I think we're a very long way from seeing that happen.
There are a few things before T+1, as you said, total cost reporting. I think that the second phase, if you will, of zero is, I can totally see what you're saying, will be a bumpier road than what the MFDA IIROC has been, simply because there are a lot more, I guess, constituent firms that would be affected with voices that they speak at the table. But it's interesting times, and I think it's going to be interesting times over the next few years. So, Bill, we're coming to the end of our episode. So, I have a few final questions for you. It's in what I call like the rapid fire format that I ask all my guests. So, let me dive into number one. So, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
And I'll direct this a little bit more at advisors. And what I've seen a lot of advisors in my career and worked with a lot of them. And the best advisors are the ones that keep their practice simple, use a relatively small shelf of products that they know and understand thoroughly. They really focus on process. They embrace technology. They document well, and basically try to run a very simple financial planning based practice, totally focused on the needs of their clients. And in terms of what I do, I always try to keep it simple. I always try to understand what is the regulation about, what is it trying to accomplish, and how do we efficiently and effectively, if you're working as a compliance officer in a dealer, efficiently and effectively implement the regulation in a way that allows for the advisor to continue to do their business in an efficient and effective way.
To the extent that the advisors can keep it simple in what they do, how they do, and how they communicate to clients, I think it's going to keep their business running smoothly, but I think it's also going to keep their relationship with their clients continuing to prosper. Any parting words of advice for our listeners?
Parting words of advice. I've got the basic point is also for advisors that are listening to this, try to bake compliant practices into your process. So it's not something you're adding on, not something you have to think about. It's just part of what you do every day. Bake it in. Don't, have a note-taking process, have a good KYC process, have a really good KYP process, and get suitability down so that you're checking all the boxes you need to check and ensuring that the clients are getting suitable advice. But just bake it into what you do every day. So it isn't something extra, something you have to think about, something you have to layer on top. It's just part of the procedure of the way your office works day to day. And again, the most successful advisors that have good businesses that never get in trouble really operate that way. And what kind of falls out of that one is to advisors is be aware of what's happening in the regulatory world. Read the industry press, see what's coming, see what's happening, stay ahead of it, and don't be afraid to ask questions of your firm, work with your compliance department, be their friend, not their adversary, and they can help you a lot. But it's basically be aware of regulation, bake it into your process, and work with your compliance team. Don't see them as adversaries, because they can really help you and they can really protect your business.
Really good advice, Bill. This has been lots of fun with lots of great stuff to take away for the advisors listening in. If listeners want to learn more about you or find your work, where do they go?
Well, I mean, the simplest way is the website, aum.com, and all of our contact information is there. And we can help advisors and firms in many different ways with their compliance issues, regulatory issues, answering questions for them. helping them through regulatory reviews and audits. We can perform mock audits. We provide training, especially in the mandatory areas of training. We develop policies and procedures. We develop reporting. We provide full AML compliance services, in particular annual risk assessments, 2-year effectiveness reviews, training, policy and procedure development, basic registration support. We do the registration work for a number of firms that are our clients, and that takes that burden off them, and also they know that it's done properly and efficiently. So there's really I could go into more detail, but if you have a regulatory issue, I think the best thing to do is to go to aumlaw.com, and my contact information is there, and the contact information of the firm is there. So thanks, Sam, for that, and it's been great talking to you again.
Bill, it's been a real pleasure as an old friend and as a regulatory expert to have you on this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, and thank you again. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast, and if you could rate it while you're at it, I would appreciate it. Visit samsivarajan.com, where you can download a behavioral coaching guide and find other resources. Join me in the next episode for more tips and tools to make your practice future ready.